Right on. We have another totally rewarding chats. We're here with Chris Goff, who I am stoked to talk about sales comp with, mostly because I know almost nothing about sales comp other than it's different and typically hasn't been part of the normal comp planning or incentives or anything else. They're their own little world. And so I'm excited we've got Chris on here. How you doing?
Excellent, excellent. How are you?
And I'm good. So I think where are you dialing in from?
Oh, Orlando, Florida.
Orlando, but not where you live, right?
That is correct.
Okay, so you're just smarter than those of us that are now in New England with the foliage passing and going somewhere warm.
I mean, if you prefer the cold, then so be it. I like a little sun.
I actually I like the cold and I like the summer. So, but the time between post leaves and pre snow
Mm,
in New England is probably my least favorite season, where it's kind of cold,
really?
miserable, but not enough snow to play in.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, so that's kind of my season. That's where I usually try to escape. And then in the spring, kind of the mushy mud season I could do without, but that's okay. Um,
Fair enough.
for those who don't know you, and so that I don't make a mess of it, can you give us your, history, background, where you're at now,
Yeah,
and uh,
yeah,
start there?
yeah. So I started in sales operations. Did about a little over a decade there in quota allocation, territory management. It's where I picked up some of that sales incentive work very early on in my career. Kind of like I was hired into the job and pretty much had to become an expert in it in 3 months, type of thing. Then did it for a decade. So there's a lot of the components of sales operations in my past. I then moved over to broad base comp and managed all compensation programs for a healthcare IT company for a number of years. So that's where I learned to appreciate more of the broad based comp components. So it's like learned the regulatory environment, learned benchmarking and surveys versus the creative only. That was part of my little component being variable design. And after doing that for a number of years, I moved over to where I am now. I've been there for about nearly 5 years now, and I kind of act as like a the compensation partner for the commercial division,
Hey,
and so that's the day job. So I've been doing that for a number of years, and it's a little different because it sits in total rewards. So the interesting thing about sales comp is, and this is me personally, I lived in sales, I lived in sales ops, I lived in finance, and I've sat in HR, all of the kind of doing much of the same things, because sales comp is a little bit different, as you said. It's a little weird, a little different than that of other broad based comp, and total rewards in general. And so then I also, since COVID, I kind of have created an alternate personality, if you will, and I do a lot of speaking and writing on the topic of sales comp, kind of a bit of a passion of mine, because I feel like because it sits in all different places, most people only have their little piece of the pie that they understand or see, and what's missed is a holistic sentiment on how we can best effectively impact the role that really drives revenue outcomes for the organization.
okay, no, that's great. So as we dive into that, we've got a couple of quick things first. So the human capture section here. What do you do for fun, hobbies, etc. when you're not working on comp and comp?
Yeah, yeah. This is fun. Now I write, and I actually do enjoy doing candidly things like this, and trying to learn more constantly. And I think the learning part comes from experiencing uh, new, whether it's personal development components, going out there and putting yourself out in situations where you're challenged on the topics of the things we think we know, right? And so there's travel and photography and the writing and stuff like that. So I kind of like many of those different types of things.
Okay. Um, I like the photography thing is one of those things. I love photography, like I love music, and I'm equally bad at both. It's unfortunate for photography because I spend a lot of time outside, and I'm sure I see great things, and I'm awful. I can make any beautiful scenery look awful. That's one of my
Well,
superpowers.
And digital photography is so much different as well in that there's the eye and the placement of this and the depth and understanding the picture itself, but there's that whole aspect of taking that to that next level and doing the editing, which you have to really new world. You have to really know both.
Yeah, I'm bad at the first one and gave up on the second one. So
Fair
uh,
enough.
I'm going to start with the speed round to get you going. All
Okay.
right, tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Okay. Um, high or low leverage salespeople?
Uh, there needs to be like a qualification there, but I will say high.
Okay. And you can tell me where I'm wrong in the following sessions. Are you a camp or a glamp type of person?
I would probably be somewhere in the middle because I've never really done full glamping, but I've also spent plenty of time with a sore back, with no pad on rock. So
Okay.
I would not pick that. So I was like Boy Scout camping, literally out in the woods with no with like with nothing underneath me, and I would prefer not that now. And now at this age.
Yeah, I probably need to rephrase. Should rephrase that. Are you the type that prefers like a hotel, a pot camp or posh, like a posh weekend or camping? Like that's
Hmm.
probably more
Yeah,
the genesis of the
yeah,
question.
yeah. And it probably I'm okay with the camping. Like we have an RV. We just got an RV this year, so the concept of like going out there, and it's obviously that's a little nicer than the tent in terms of options and choices and the stuff you can bring, right? So probably that.
Well, that's for sure. So this will be another episode next year when you're in the RV. I'll be in the RV for the next 4 weeks. So
Nice.
we'll have to do an RV to RV,
I love it.
you
Love
know,
it.
session. Do you use the term comp ratio or range penetration?
Range penetration.
Okay. And the most important question in the speed round that we've been dealing nationally here with: crunchy or creamy peanut butter?
Hmm. It's interesting. I could be okay with both, but I prefer crunchy.
Okay. Yeah, I tell people you got to pick a lane. For some people you can tell the in the comp space in particular where people analyze all the time, they'll come back with, well, it depends based on what it's going with, what it's going on, and they start to that. No, you got
Yeah.
$2.50, $3, you're going down the aisle, you've been told to get peanut butter. All right.
Yep.
Um, so let's kick off. So as I mentioned, with a lot of experience, the one place I usually highlight that I have so little experience because I usually punt. The only thing I know is that it's really difficult and probably some of the basics is in sales comp. Can you give us the keys to evaluating and implementing? Just really start with best practices and what you look at when you're looking at sales comp.
Yeah. Yeah. So I look at this with a couple of like points of condition because I feel like sales comp has basic principles associated with it, like the best practices. But I think that there's always a couple of caveats that need to be taken into account. One is genuine affordability on the part of the organization, and many times we're talking about we need to grow, so we sometimes overhire and then expect things to just work out. And sales is genuinely one of those areas. So that I think matters in terms of true affordability on the part of the organization to actually cover the costs associated with sales and getting someone up to a point of productivity. Then there's the strategy. Sometimes we hire people, whether that's people we know, people we like, or we knew that they were good once upon a time, and then we figure out the job afterwards, versus actually settling on the strategy and then knowing how they can contribute to the strategy. And then lastly, culture. And so this is the one where again that same person may have that similar byproduct of they were good when you worked with them 15 years ago in this organization. Is this current organization the same as that organization once upon a time? And what we want to do is can they sell with the same values? Are we aligned on similar principles of the way we want to show up with a customer? All of that sort of good stuff. Because sales is also the like first point of contact in many cases with the experience you want your customers to have. And so you need to be congruent or definitely in sync on a couple of those things. So I kind of like to make sure that any choice we make in sales comp needs to be something that is potentially sustainable, as aligned with our strategy at this moment in time, since strategies evolve very quickly, and congruent with our culture. And so I think like there's that. Then there is the actual broad principles of like making sure, if I kind of give you a couple bullets, like making sure that we reward as close to the event that we want to acknowledge, the behavior, the outcome, whatever that is, as closely as possible. So now what I mean by that is when you ask someone to sell something, there's all of the phases of work that are done across the length of a sales cycle. And so you'll have some jobs that really just do lead generation, right? You'll have some jobs that just do technical specialty or coverage, either pre-sale or post-sale. Then you'll have people who own the sales cycle length in its entirety, and or people who just focus on the closure, like negotiation, procurement type of functions. And every company is different in that they have different aspects there. What you want to do is say, if I'm going to pay you for this thing, we want it to be something that is we identify as the activity, the behavior, the action, the outcome, whatever that is, right? The measure, and pay as soon as we can afford to that, to have that psychologically beneficial, cycle kick in, right? So I think that's a general thing that we want to do. I'd also say that aspects of eligibility is an important one, right? Identifying what jobs in your company are the ones that you actually want to pay a sales incentive to. Normally, what happens is that gets really, really fuzzy and foggy, and so we have lots of different people that are on either conflicting or just overlaying types of jobs. You'll have all of the sales ops staff that's on one, and all kinds of other things. It's just kind of gets really, really messy. And one of the things you have to have as an organization is a understanding of what level of proximity or influence or involvement with the decision maker is needed in order to trigger this sort of mechanical pay. So I think those are the big ones that come to mind for me immediately. I mean, there's obviously lots and lots of principles around like accelerator, thresholds, like the pay curve, payment timing, all that sort of good stuff. But I think if you have the first couple, it's understanding what the rest of the filters are to land at what you can go pick up a book on the subject to kind of get you the rest of the way.
So before we talk about structure, which you just mentioned some of them and all the items that come in there, it's interesting you talk about the affordability, etc. How do you see programs in sales comp or incentive comp line up with the timing of getting people on board? Because for me, that's always been one of the fascinating pieces of how do you compensate a salesperson, particularly with some SaaS software sales that have, 6 months is early and 18 to 24-month sales cycles. How do you structure and deal with that early piece of it?
Yeah. And there's many ways to do that, candidly, right? So some of it is the what are they bringing with them part that I think is a great place to start. Is do they have commissions that they are missing out on from their prior company, right? We would talk about a sign-on. We would talk about some sort of guarantee for a period of time. Are they taking an active deal with them? We're not talking about ethics here. We're talking about the practical reality is sometimes we're acquiring a book or an anticipated book from somebody else, right? It is what it is. Yeah. But that's a question of can they accelerate the sales cycle because of doing that? And is that something that's real and effective? We want to account for that in some capacity. There's also like a phase-in part that I think is important for us to acknowledge, that if it's let's say a startup or a new line of business or something like that, it's unproven sales, there's also an opportunity for us to consider like a pay mix shift after year one. So like if it's really long-term sales cycle, this is the interesting thing about short-term incentives to address long-term problems, right? You can get into some challenges associated with that. And so there's sometimes there's phased in. So let's say a base shift after year one with a certain chunk of guarantee that then gets dropped into variable in the next year, right? And I think you can have some of those sorts of mechanics there's also just a general question of if that person's coming in and replacing an open territory, has that territory been worked? And if so, that's also the ability for them to immediately just drop in and continue working that transaction. So I think to a certain extent it depends on your phase, whether that's growth or just the processes internally to kind of address some of that. Ideally, you would want to have thought about that ahead of time.
So in theory, I mean, it's similar to broad base, and it'll probably be blatantly obvious when it comes out of my mouth, but kind of start with the business fundamentals as opposed to I heard these other things worked over here, but start with the business fundamentals and kind of sales cycle, the process,
Yeah.
which is a little. I mean, it always comes out of my mouth super simple. Same thing with broad base. Like, are you aligned to the business? But it's same story, different function.
Yeah. And what's interesting there is that most everybody starts with this is what we did over here. Pretty much always the case. You bring your comp plan from, like if you're a sales leader, you bring your comp plan from your old company and says, I'm familiar with this. This is what I'd like to use. Then we have to figure out, like, does that make sense? Is there some reason, just because you're familiar with something doesn't mean it makes sense here or will work here or any of that sort of stuff, right? Our business may be different enough. But, people kind of move towards their level of comfort. And that's where we usually, and this happens in sales comp a lot, is this is what I want to pay somebody, and then we reverse engineer the job, the comp, the function, the pay curve, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things really do get us into challenges because we've kind of neglected those first things that I said.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's talk about the structure for those of us that are semi-remedial. Like if you were to walk in and say, Sean, I'm going to give you a 5 or 10 minute class at sales comp. How do you see that being broken down in the different levels of? Because obviously there's base, and I don't think we need to spend much time with base. Yep. But what most of us in probably broad base would consider STI is where the world goes crazy in sales. So how do you see that stuff getting broken out the best you can?
Yeah. So I tend to, like broad-based comp, I tend to want to start with the job content because that is where we can ideally find out the core components that differentiate. So it's like if I have a decision tree here, right? I'm going to start with the content, and that's going to tell me, is the person, let's say, new business, sales, emphasis? Are they a generalist? Are they a client sales? Are they inside sales, or are they sales management, or a specialist? So that's kind of like the big few. I think Dave Cichelli's book, I think it's like 33 roles, right? But when we get into bigger details, it's like inside sales, field sales, right? Sales management, individual contributor. You kind of filter through those, and then there's like a handful of core jobs that then drive both pay mix and the sentiment of what traditionally lines up with risk reward as well. So you generally, the business values incremental new business in terms of anticipated incremental revenue, right? That's kind of the thing. So what we do is we generally have a little bit more at risk for those jobs and a little bit more reward, which then translates into accelerators. Candidly, right? That is the upside. That as I said, pay mix, right? So we have the base, and then you kind of build in the mechanic of, do you have a target incentive, or do you have a commission rate plan? So there's kind of two big plan types for this. Is like one's a rate plan, right, or commission rate plan, and a bonus plan, effectively like a quota based plan, right? Those are your two big categories. When we kind of layer that in, you have these points of decision making that are tied to both business decision strategy and the function of the role. When we get a little further, this is where it gets very familiar to those that are familiar with other short-term incentives. Is that you have a pay curve, right? You're gonna have a place where pay starts and a place where pay ends, and it's really how much are you going to reward in between. Now, generally, what's a little different for sales is because this is the part that I mentioned before, was proximity to the decision making. This is the part where, because we generally have a seller who is accountable for delivering on revenue, we don't like to cap the sales incentives associated with that as a general practice. Now, it goes back to practical affordability, right, and or the declining marginal productivity as well. Candidly, sometimes caps are appropriate if you have capacity issues, depending on your type of business. It is what it is in terms of the limitations therein. But those are kind of the big components of the structure of the pay curve. What we then get into next will then be payout timing. So there's performance periods. So we have monthly plans, you have quarterly plans, semi-annual plans, or annual plans. And it all depends on the frequency of measurement that triggers along that pay curve that level of performance. And some businesses have stability enough to know that we need this sort of activity on a monthly basis. And so you can accelerate every month, right? Some businesses, longer term sales cycle length would translate into, annual plans. Like the longer the inability to manage or control against a level of performance, the longer the period needs to be. And then payout timing is mostly more like it's more of a cash thing. Ideally, this is the part I mentioned before about the proximity to reward, but it's also the practical reality. When does the business get paid so that they can actually afford to pay commissions? Yeah. Right? I mean, that's the like. For whatever we would like to have, there is the what do we need to have, and ideally we find somewhere in between if at all possible. So I think those are the big components of, I would say, our points of decision making along sales comp. The pre-work, as I really didn't get into, is the target setting, the definition of an opportunity, and the territorial assignments, all of which are needed to really have like fairness under the comp plan.
It's interesting. I've always been a big proponent of uncapped sales. And I guess until you mentioned the productivity, and I guess that's because I've been in the software space where in theory, like that's the problem we'll address in other ways. Like you can't have too many sales.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've never thought about that because I've always said like, just keep them going. Now, how you handle the accelerators over the top of that, you've got to kind of think through like how much margin am I willing to give for additional sales?
Yeah.
Here you go. But that's at least one example of if you're selling something you have to make, like you can't make more.
Correct. Yeah, you talk about something like professional services where you might actually hit genuine capacity limitations.
Yeah.
Of people, time, and or ability to deliver, but you also have product manufacturing, right? And sometimes making more of something does not translate into the company making incrementally more margin.
Do you see, I mean, all those things that are going with the timing and paying close versus, when we get paid on our first invoice, and I have seen in the past where you get paid when they paid their first one, etc. Especially on the monthly versus quarterly versus annual, do you see that aligning to turnover? Because from the standpoint of, I need to wait for that deal to get done, get paid, and then I didn't fill the rest of my pipe, so
yeah,
I'm gonna bail. Like, are there ways to A, tackle that, and B, is that kind of a real thing, or more what some of us worry about that isn't a thing?
Yeah, old school. I kind of grew up in old school enterprise software. We would sell 10-year deals. We would have, probably wouldn't make money until year 3. We would, implementation might be 18 months. Type of thing. Yeah. It's initial license fee software mixed with a variety of third-party services, mixed with hardware. You're setting up an environment, all that sort of good stuff. And we had mechanics of deferred pay that the longer term you sold, the longer the payout was. Now it didn't extend through 10 years because that'd be crazy. They tried certain things, but what was the sort of positive and side effect there is there was a sentiment, I think, with like, this I think is a little bit of an older school mindset as well, is that there's a retentive impact associated with that. And there's true, people will want to stay, whether they're good or happy or productive or not, because there's money to be had, right? From the thing that you owe them. So yes, there's a retentive effect. But the problem with that is if they were very successful in the past, we've also had, and I experienced this one time as well. I remember we had a major issue of effectively these annuity streams for some of these folks. They were very, very successful the past many prior years, and they had these commissions in the hundreds of thousands that were going to be coming in every year. They were like teed up.
Yeah.
And then what, if any, motivation does the person have other than to like not get fired, essentially, right? That goes along with that. And so we've set up an environment that creates problems for people. I don't know if you're familiar with Alfie Kohn's Punished by Rewards, but there are sort of adverse side effects associated with the manipulation of incentives and the way people sort of respond. And so we have negative side effects with something that we think is really, really positive from time to time. It changes people's sentiments, especially about like altruism, and their opinions about their job and their work. And so you definitely have to address some of these pay timing components. And ideally, it's not something that you lag too far into the future because you don't want to mix it in with decisions in the future as much as possible, right? Like you don't want it to be a 4-year deferral schedule, and then year 3, and then year 2, year 2, 3, year 4, then makes them think about different things in terms of their focus, their emphasis on the type of work that we need. Because really, sales is a "what have you done for me lately" type of sport, and we want it to keep it more that way.
But how, on the flip side, I guess, you've got organizations who pay on either year one or ACV of the contract. And so it also creates the finish line so close that they go from making money to potentially no money, just having a bad couple quarters. Like, how do you prevent against that? So I definitely, I hadn't thought of the, the old, because that was always my thing. Do you have hunters? Do you have farmers? And then do you have the mix of what I used to call the farmers with shotguns running around the field? So they're managing their piece, and they've got 2% on current accounts and 10 on new or something, right? And so at some point they built their goal is to build up almost this annuity based business for you. But I never thought about like at some point they're like, actually, this is enough to live on. I just have to farm. I don't actually do anything anymore.
Yeah.
But on the other end, how do you control this? I've got some good reps, and software can be a little bit, especially for big game hunting. I guess we'll stay in that mode. How do you keep them through those small lulls, even if they're a good performer?
Yeah, and I think this is the interesting thing about because you talked about two pieces here, right? Some of it's the comp and their personal cash flow, and some of that is the role itself. And so I think from time to time there is a tendency for an org to want to solve for cash flow by giving people that the farm or the shotgun. Right, so they become generalists versus true hunters or true farmers. And when a company is smaller, that makes sense because you don't have the resources to do all of the things. So everybody's got to do a little bit more. You give them the landmines and the shotguns and whatever else it is that you can do to kind of like make the greatest impact as much as possible. But I think over time, when there is a defined market of new business, there is a certain amount of need to retain those individuals where there are natural lulls in the business. Now, ideally, what happens there is that the compensation, if we know, let's say, our world is they're going to close, a good rep's going to close one deal a year. And if that's the case, what it is we need the other components of comp to well exceed that, like that one-time reward, to well exceed the lull, if you will. Right. So in this case, if the person makes $100,000 a year on target, what we want, and we say that there's pretty much only like the one deal, like we need you to find the one new deal. That deal, if they can influence the size, needs to be something where they can make $200,000 on that one deal. Right. If like you got one shot on goal and that's all it is because it's that aggressive of a market, or it's a 24-month sales cycle or something crazy, then it needs to be something that's excessive enough so that it kind of mushrooms the rest of the time that you can't participate in. Now, obviously, you can blend the job content and say, in the meantime, we can give you some of this little stuff to do. But it's a question of whether or not the opportunity cost is worth it, because then are they going to focus on the quick burn stuff more so than the
Yeah.
rabbits versus the elephant? That's the part that can be
Or
super super dangerous.
I close the big deal, I get paid, and I don't want to wait another 2 years, and I bail out. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is finding the person who is comfortable in the feast or famine world.
Yeah. So two other questions. I don't know where they'll go. So the biggest difference between, biggest difference or two you see between, sales incentive comp and broad base.
I believe that for someone to be successful in sales comp, you have to have a much greater understanding of the business. Candidly, so I'll
Okay.
start. I'll start there in terms of that being the number one thing in my opinion, right? That you can't effectively get into the weeds of how best to motivate someone or encourage someone to act or shift in behavior without knowing what it is that we're trying to shift or change behavior in. And that is how the individual has to do a thing and how that connects to the strategy of the organization. That I think the one thing that you can do in broad-based comp is when you come up with like a corporate bonus program, the details of how that connects to an individual's job, ideal, but it's not really necessary because you have to come up with like one program. Sales incentive is ideally an individualized program that is meaningful for the person to create or prompt a shift in behavior. Like quotas go up every year. What are you going to do differently? How are you going to be more productive? How are we going to optimize territory or coverage or shift the quota attention or become more productive in order to kind of gain that financial outcome that the organization now needs? It's a shift all the time. And so I believe that someone in sales comp has to have a much greater understanding of what it is that those individual functions do.
Yeah, for me, I think my perspective actually is, yeah, that complexity. It's kind of like you spend a lot of time in broad base, figuring out how I'm going to deal with people close to market at their base pay, maybe 1 year total cash, how I'm going to do with merit increases, how I'm going to do with all this stuff that's in the base pay, right? Because people come in at multiple levels, you've got compression, you got all this stuff. I've always found that sales is interesting because you mentioned 100,000. Well, let's say the base pays 100,000 for this sales role once it's all figured out. That's just what everybody makes. Like problem solved, end of story. Male,
Yep.
female, black, brown, green, orange, doesn't matter. Like you make $100,000. Like problem solved. And now the complexity comes in the STI where you can make that. I wouldn't say I'd say it's less complex only from the standpoint that it's usually more programmatic. At this level, it's this percent personal and this much company, and it's applied equitably across everybody.
Right.
And that's just what it is. And then on your side, it gets infinitely complex based on these different roles. And I guess the part that I found to be interesting, and I'll liken it to the restaurant business a little bit, is the tip sharing. I've seen over the years has strategically changed in there as the
Yep.
sales function has gotten more complex. It used
Yep.
to be the salesperson got 100% of it, and the rest of your job was kind of based on the company's performance, almost like everybody else. And then they started basically saying, actually, we're not going to pay you on the sales team unless we're making money. That's where it's going to come from. So you're all, I mean, there's a lot of really good reasons for it. We're all aligned.
Yeah.
That tip sharing becomes really interesting because the more people you share it with, at what point, it was the busboys and then it was the host, and then the kitchen's like, whoa, hey, we
Yep.
want some of this. And then the dishwasher's like, whoa, everyone else in the building has tip sharing. I want some of the tips, but the tip hasn't fundamentally changed at the top, right? The company's still charging what they charge. So I think
Hmm.
that complexity is added to it over the years.
Yeah. It is interesting because there's like ways of cross hatching this sort of coverage. So tip sharing is an interesting one because I think it is very much the same. We have a pool of money, and we're talking about the sharing across roles or sharing across the people in the same role. So it's like if all servers share it. I've been to steakhouses
Yeah.
where that was the case, where this is for all the servers, so they're all going to share it. Great. Well, that means they collaborate in a very different sort of way. There is no like that's my table. It's
Yeah.
the what needs to get done and we go do it. Hey, in sales, it's very much the same way. You have team selling. You have collaborative specialists that are technical or scientific, and they have to coordinate with maybe a one-to-many sort of relationship with the account owners or the new business people. It's kind of the nature of it. And so you want to encourage people to act in the intended behavior, and the mix of both cultural dynamics, right, expectations of these things also changes it dramatically.
Yeah. And the last one I had kind of interesting, the biggest misconception about, sales compensation is you've talked to people.
Misconception. I would almost say it's kind of like a lack of understanding is probably the bigger thing that I run into when I talked. First off, I talk to people regularly that never knew it was a job. So when people say, "What do you do?" and I say this, and they're like, "Okay, please explain more." That's like one of the most common things that people don't. I was like, I didn't even know that was a thing. I've never heard of this job before. I didn't know people did that, right? So that's kind of one. But then when I talk to other people in like broad-based comp, most of them are like, I don't really want to touch that with 10-foot pole. When it comes to sales comp, I mean, that's a common thing. But I personally think that's like the misunderstanding, if you will, because I feel like it's the most interesting. It's like the most interesting of the comps, in my opinion. I mean, obviously, I'm biased because I'm in it, right? But I think it's like the most dynamic and the most difficult one to hope to ever get right, because we change it very regularly. Like, we don't just change it once a year. Many times we change it multiple times a year, and we're constantly trying to find the thing, versus there's a tendency to change less. I think on much of the other side of the house, like, we want more consistency. Well, this is a dynamic, everything is gray and everything is up for grabs all the time sort of world.
I think part of that, to be honest, is, and I've been the same way. I know it's complicated. I know it's different. I think there would be better integration and better thought. And actually, your comment around tying to the business more, I think it should belong in the total rewards department. I know it goes over to sales a lot of times because it's sales driving, etc.
Yeah.
But I think those fundamentals and tying it to the business, there'll be effects to everyone else because you have to learn the business. I think it provides a little bit of that check and balance versus the sales team. Someone to basically say, I'm not in your house. You have to convince me why you want to change this sales structure for the long-term benefit of the business, versus like, because, I'll always go back to, if the CRO or the head of sales also wants to exit in the next 12 months, they've got reasons. There's a lot of personal things that happen in sales, and salespeople move more for many reasons. It's a more transferable skill. And so I think having that kind of separation personally is good. And then the sales, I firmly believe comp people can learn it, but I think what the first thing is, it's very different. I think it's super cool. I've learned a ton today already, and actually the way the human side of it as much as anything versus structure.
That was a big part of what kept me in it. I think was the thinking that the things that I do like intimately impact someone's paycheck this month, right? And so when I was doing quotas and territories, I really wanted to make sure that it was fair, it was equitable, and that naturally connects to the other side, because I agree with you. It's ultimately a pay program. In order for us to do this appropriately, fairly, equitably, you do need to look at it more holistically of all of the components that impact the inputs and outputs of pay decisions.
That's awesome. So I really appreciate it. The last question I generally ask doesn't have to be sales comp at all. Just if you could automagically, which is a highly technical word, fix one thing in all of HR, not necessarily just, total rewards, what would that be?
I have no idea, but I have one that kind of comes to mind at the moment, and that would be that people become more comfortable having conversations about compensation.
Yeah.
That this would be the people in the business. This would be people in general. Yeah. That it's as much as possible, get more comfortable. I think that translates naturally into what is coming anyway with transparency. Like, get to a point of talking about comp as just a thing that you participate in when you trade your time at an organization, right? That it's not much more than that when it all comes down. It's temporary, and it's transferable.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to it, I think that's great. I think it's come up several times around the term communications, but I think it's communications from the company out to employees. It's from employees to other employees. It's from the total rewards team out to employees and managers. I think people just have to get comfortable. And I am an old dude, so I do remember and have seen the transformation of, you could get fired for talking to Chris about your pay to actually you can talk about it to I think there's going to become a point that they're like actually I hope employees talk about their pay because they're going to talk about what makes them move and motivate and what goes. So I think we're in that long-term transformation. So I think which won't happen without people being comfortable. Um, this has been great. I really appreciate it. For those that are there, obviously, if you're watching on one of the regular platforms, subscribe so you can keep seeing more people like Chris. We will have Chris's information. LinkedIn, we'll tag him when we post on LinkedIn, etc. As you can tell, he's super easy to talk to and super knowledgeable. So feel free to reach out and grab a virtual coffee with him. I really appreciate it, dude.
Thank you, Sean. Appreciate it.